As you may know, a little while ago I made a figure called the Visible Hutt, which was a custom 3D printed figure based on a 3D scan of the vintage Kenner Jabba figure that was created by Desert Octopus. I took that scan and kind of embedded a Hutt skeleton that I sculpted myself digitally, and created this, what you see here, and also painted and printed it, of course. While I was making this, though, one of the concepts that I had in mind, I had a few of them. One was maybe doing it all in clear resin somehow and showing the skeleton visible through that. The other was showing the puppeteers that were inside the actual Jabba the Hutt puppet, the actual full-size one from Return of the Jedi, as vintage Kenner action figures inside this one. That kind of stuck with me. I knew it was probably beyond my capabilities to do that. I don't really know how to sculpt action figures, but I thought if I had the figures themselves, I could probably do it similar to this and somehow embed them, in the actual Jabba figure. So I contacted Desert Octopus and I asked if this would be something that he'd be willing to help me with. And he said yes. I should mention, first of all, that this whole project was kind of based on what I saw in a documentary called Slimy Piece of Worm-Ridden Filth, Life Inside Jabba the Hutt by Jamie Benning, who is part of Filmumentaries. And basically they showed what it was like to be a puppeteer inside Jabba, what they were doing in there, and how they brought the puppet to life. The original Jabba puppet was made of latex rubber and was gigantic, enough to fit 3 people inside. You had 2 men in the sort of head and torso area that were controlling one of Jabba's arms apiece. Now, in the case of the guy on the right here, that's Toby Philpott, he did Jabba's left arm and also the tongue when necessary with his other arm. And on the other side we have Dave Barclay, who did Jabba's right arm and also moved the head around to some degree as well. And then in the tail section we have Mike Edmonds, who was a little person who was there to make the tail kind of move around. There were other people who also were involved in puppeteering Jabba, but in terms of the people who were inside, it's these 3. And as you may be able to tell, they each had little TV monitors around their necks or on a stand here in the case of Mike Edmonds, so that they could see what was going on outside of the puppet, because they were entirely enclosed inside this giant latex rubber sack, essentially. And so, if they needed to coordinate with each other or with the actors who were outside the puppet, they had to look at these monitors. I was really fascinated by this video, and I definitely recommend that you watch the whole thing in its entirety. I'll link it in the video description. It's about 20 minutes long, so it's not a huge investment of time. And I thought it gave us a unique insight into some of the things that went on behind the scenes in the creation of the film, which I'm always really interested in. And that's why I wanted to kind of combine my 2 interests, which is, I love the behind the scenes stuff and the props and everything, but also the toys that were made for the film. And I thought it'd be interesting to combine them in this way. I told Desert Octopus about this documentary, and he watched it as well. And after a while, he came back with some really impressive 3D models that were not only for the puppeteers themselves, but for the Jabba puppet and its interior, really modeled to show a lot of detail that I was really impressed with that he could come up with based on what little you can see in this video. So here we have all of the parts printed and partially assembled. I have done some work to them already, sort of off camera, because I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do to make all these fit together properly and work together, and I didn't record everything I was doing, but I will let you know here what I've done so far. So first of all, we have the figures themselves. This is Toby Philpott and Dave Barclay. They've got their gigantic Jabba arms there. I think that's really funny looking. I love it. And they've also got their video monitors that they can look at so they can see what's going on outside of Jabba. They, of course, will basically just fit in here, but you have to get them situated in such a way that they'll fit into this Jabba head. And that was sort of my first issue that I ran into, I guess. The original model had pegs here that would join with holes in here, and those worked fine, except that I found that when you're trying to put all this together, you really kind of have to remove this top part multiple times, and when I did that 2 or 3 times, the pegs broke off. Or actually, I guess one of the parts here broke off first. But anyway, I decided I needed something that would be a little bit more robust if I'm going to be removing this repeatedly. So I drilled holes in here just with a hand drill, and I glued magnets there, super strong magnets, so that they will lock into place like that. And that seems to work pretty well. We've got a little problem with the print back here, but let's not worry about that. I may try and fix that with a little putty. So yeah, what I have to do is, I guess, show you first of all how these guys are going to fit in here. You have to kind of snake the big Jabba arms in like that. And you know, there's no way you can do this when the thing is attached to the body, at least as far as I can tell. So it's even a little bit tricky when it's not attached to the body, because they have to be kind of positioned properly right next to each other. But I will say, you know, it's kind of amazing that this idea that I came up with of having the Puppeteers be vintage action figures, you know, Star Wars scale action figures, and be inside of Jabba actually works. I mean, it's actually the right size and everything, more or less. Now, you know, it's a little bit tight, but it does work. So now I've got them on here. I'm going to try and put them in. And this is sort of the hardest part, I guess, getting them exactly positioned. There we go. That's pretty much the way that it needs to be, I think. And then we can put his arm back down. The other thing is, you know, first of all, the tail itself was made so that it could theoretically kind of move back and forth if you move this thing, but it was just a single little nubbin that held it in place, and it would kind of move all over the place or potentially fall out, so I just glued it in place. It's not like you can actually really move it once you've got all this assembled. Anyway, the other thing is this little TV monitor for Mike Edmonds, who's the little person who was controlling the tail. It, I think, was intended to be glued in place, but if you do that, then basically you'll never be able to get Mike Edmonds' figure out of here again. So what I did was to put a tiny magnet in the bottom of this and a larger magnet there in the hole where it was supposed to be glued, and that way it'll just sort of stay there, so that if we put Mike in here, hopefully we can fit him in here. There we go. It's a little bit of a tight fit, but it works. There we go. You see he's still got that magnet there between his legs that he can use for the monitor. So there we go. So, you know, so far so good. Now, the other thing is this. This, of course, is the front of Jabba there. That's supposed to, at least in the original design, swing open on a hinge and reveal the guys inside. Now, the problem is it was a 3D printed hinge, and it, even though I used the stronger ABS-like film or resin, it really was not strong enough for that hinge, and it broke basically instantly when I tried to install it. So what I decided to do was just to fill this area on both sides where the hinge would have gone with a little putty, and then just sort of press fit this into place, because I really, you know, the hinge idea is kind of flawed in the sense that it hits this arm if you're not careful too. So I'm not too terribly upset about not having a hinge there. Now you do have to kind of push this in place exactly right. The guys inside are maybe a little bit out of position because they're making this seem a little bit bigger than it really should be, but you get the point. This is about what it would look like. Now I'm not going to display it like this, because there's really no point in doing that. You might as well just display a regular Jabba. I'm going to have the door here just kind of be off to the side. Maybe I'll have it on a little stand next to it like that. And I think that'll be just fine. So, now that we've got all this taken care of, basically all there is to do is to paint everything. That's going to be a major job, but yeah, I think it's come along pretty well. And I'm really happy with how it looks up until this point. And here we have the finished model. I didn't take any video of me actually painting it for various reasons. It was a pretty long process, and it just seemed like it would add to my workload to try and document it. So for this one, I'm just going to show you the end result here. We have the door, which, as I think I mentioned, I removed the hinge from here and replaced with the putty, which, you really can't tell. I think that was pretty successful. And here on the other side, we have some ductwork and things, and this is, where the hand would go out the mouth. So a lot of cool detail on the back of that, and I think I'm just going to have it, displayed next to it somehow, maybe like that. In any case, it does fit on here. Just a press fit, as I mentioned. It's a little tight, but you kind of want it to be tight, I suppose. Doesn't quite fit perfectly. There's a little bit of a gap in places, but it's good enough. I'm not going to be displaying it this way, and it's really more of an accessory than anything. But if we look at the actual piece itself here, we can see inside to see the Puppeteers, Toby Philpott, Dave Barclay, Mike Edmonds. Inside, working Jabba. We can, move Jabba's arms up and down carefully. And I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I do find it difficult. Maybe I'm getting old. My eyes are not what they used to be, but I do find it difficult to paint the faces on these figures. So those are maybe not as good as they could be, but overall, I think it turned out well. Let's go ahead and, I guess, take these guys out of here so we can see what it looks like on the inside. So if we want to do that, probably the easiest way is to just take the head off, because it's connected by magnets, as I mentioned, and then we can take the figures out that way. These don't stand up on their own without a stand, because they're so kind of top heavy with these giant arms. This one in particular is a little tricky to snake out of here. And, I will say, if you're not careful, you will end up scraping off some paint while you're doing it. I've done that in a couple of minor places. But yeah, there we go. The faces are just sort of mediocre. Especially had trouble with the glasses on this guy, so let's not look too closely at that. But I really liked how these monitors turned out. I thought that was pretty cool. This is an example of something that I probably would have painted differently if I hadn't actually watched the video and to see what they looked like inside Jabba there. But, it seemed to me anyway that it was kind of a white or maybe a light gray color. So that's what I went with for those. And if we look in here, we can get a better look at Mike Edmonds and his little video monitor. Let's go ahead and take him out of there, if I can get him out. There he is. So we have all three of the guys now out of Jabba, and you can see the interior detail, which is considerable in there. I just, to some degree, kind of just winged it to use colors that seemed appropriate. But I will say, again, just like with the video monitors, if I hadn't watched the video, I probably would have chosen maybe the same color as the outside for the inside. But instead, I went with more of a sort of an off-white color, because it seems like it was basically just the color of unpainted vinyl, rubber on the inside there. There's a lot of detail here on the inside of the head, which looks really cool. And of course, we can take that off if we want. So that was pretty cool. We can do that if we want to as well. So yeah, this is definitely way better than I could have done on my own. My initial concept when I asked Desert Octopus to help with this, I say, he did basically everything. When I asked him to, if he'd be willing to do this project, was basically just to have him do the figures, because those are considerably beyond my capabilities. And then I would, hollow out the inside of the Jabba figure and just have it be sort of empty inside and try and figure out how to fit them in there. This is way, way better than that would have been. So I am super happy with how this has turned out. And, if I'm honest, the original concept before I even talked to him was that maybe I would make this into a limited edition figure that I would release in the same way that I did the Visible Hutt figure. But I'm kind of glad that it didn't work out that way, and that anyone can download and print these models, because this turned out to be a lot more work, I think, than I would feel comfortable with in making a run of figures. It's just I don't think I want to do it. So it's better for this to be available to everyone. And even if you don't have a 3D printer, I've seen quite a few people offering these up for sale, just the prints, raw prints. I haven't seen anyone else actually paint it yet. But so if you're interested in getting something like this, there are options for it. And in addition, I've talked briefly with Desert Octopus about the possibility of him doing some other releases in this same vein, by which I mean sort of showing behind the scenes of Star Wars in the same way that we're seeing here. So, for example, they could have the vintage Darth Vader figure, but with Dave Prowse's head. Dave Prowse, of course, being the guy who played the body of Darth Vader. Or you could have Anthony Daniels or Kenny Baker in their droid costumes, something along those lines. I think that would be cool. And, if you agree, maybe you can go to Desert Octopus's website, his Instagram page is what I mean, and, let him know that. Or you can also comment in the comments below. That's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing what we created, and maybe, hopefully it'll inspire you to try and make something yourself. Thanks for watching. Also, check out the link in the video description if you're interested in supporting the channel. The Palace VIPs you see here and Angelica Brady have all done that, as well as my other patrons. And I'd really like to see that number grow, so definitely check it out.